Hello everyone. In this section we're going to be covering the physics engine in Corona. So go ahead and take a look at the physics API in Corona. You'll see that there are quite a few functions that you can call here. We're mostly going to concern ourselves with starting the physics system, creating bodies, and changing some of the basic features of the physics engine. So the first thing you need to do in your main file is go ahead and require physics. So it's actually not initially on or brought in to the app simply because of its size and kind of heft as far as running the engine. So the first thing you need to do once you've required the physics is go ahead and start it. So the physics engine doesn't actually start until you've called it. You can also pause it and stop it as you see in the final example. We'll take a look at that later. So the physics starts with a default gravity of 0 in the horizontal direction and 9.8 in vertical direction. So that is the kind of basic Earth gravity. So we're going to go ahead and set our gravity to that just to see how you can go ahead and change it. So if you go through and set gravity, 0 and 9.8. Now of course this doesn't really do much for us because we don't have any physics objects yet. So let's go ahead and add a physics object. So the first thing we're going to do is create the ground rect. So this will be our ground object that stays at the bottom of our screen to make it so any objects falling through gravity land on this. Otherwise they'll fall out of the screen and we'll no longer be able to interact with them. So go ahead and create this rectangle as it is in the final example. And then we're going to go ahead and add body. So this body that we're adding is a static body. Static bodies will not react to gravity and will not react to other objects interacting with them. So if something falls on a static object, it keeps that object there, and the other object will react. So see, we've created static object, doesn't actually do anything, but if we remove the static, this will fall due to gravity. So we could actually change gravity, let's say 5 in the horizontal direction, 0 vertical. Now, our object's actually going to fall to the left. Let's give it a higher gravity. Give it a little bit of vertical as well. And then remove the static. You'll see now it's falling that way because gravity is going right. So if we did -5, it'll actually head this way. So let's go ahead and put that back. We can actually do negative vertical as well, so it actually falls upwards, so gravity's heading in this direction. Alright, so that's our basics for playing around with gravity, so we're going to go ahead and set this back to static. And now we're going to create another object. We're going to create a circle. So we have these two lines here in the final example, so we actually do circles, display new circle, give it a location and a radius, as we have in the past. Then we're going to add a body to this circle. You'll notice we're not actually defining its type. We're going to let it default, which is dynamic. But then we're going to give it a table of options. So to create a circle, you have to give a radius option for the physics system to know that you're asking it to be a circle in the physics system. We're also here giving it a density and a bounce, which we'll cover in just a moment. So once you've added those, go ahead and save it. And you should have this circle fall and bounce off the static object. So now you can see this is the add body section. So we created a circular body using our radius. Now if we didn't have this radius, it is still drawn as a circle, but it's now treated as a square. So let's go ahead and take a look at how the physics system is actually working. So we're going to set the draw mode. So if you do physics.setDrawMode, and we're going to set it to hybrid. What hybrid does is it actually draws over top of everything what the physics is actually seeing. So you have your images that you actually drew, and then the physics system on top of it. And if we change this to debug, this actually draws just the physics objects, so you can see just how the physics system is working. So you have that square bouncing on this. So if we go ahead and give this its radius back, we'll see that now it'll be a circle bouncing on this square. And now you can set the physics back to normal Normal is the standard non-visual aspect of it, so you can switch between normal and debug as you're making changes and need to test the physics. So we'll comment this one out for now and have debug running. So now let's go ahead and add another object. We're going to add an image this time. We'll put this back to normal and do new box. And we're going to have this crate drawn on screen. So I added this image. It should be in your folder here that you can go ahead and load up. And then let's give it a location. So we're going to put it right over here. And then we're going to add physics to it. So for the new box, we're going to give it a higher density, make it much heavier, and we're going to give it higher friction so it doesn't slide around as fluidly. Once you add that, you should have it fall as well next to the circle. So now they're both falling and landing. Now you notice that when this box fell, because it's a square, it lands flat and it just basically stays there. So let's give it some rotation to see what happens if it lands slightly rotated. So we'll set rotation to, let's say, 5 degrees. So now it's falling at an angle, which causes it to bounce, knocking the circle off the screen. Let's see that with the images. And as you see, the static object is not reactive to any of this due to its static nature, whereas the normal dynamic objects will bounce around and be affected by each other. Now if we were to set the density to this rectangle to 0.01, you'll see that it now gets affected far more because the density of the circle is stronger. So we can set this density so this is a much thicker, heavier object, so it barely reacts to the crate. So let's try that the other way around. So you have this with a much higher density, it's going to knock the circle away. And if we add them at about the equal density, they'll react to each other about equally. Now of course this is a larger object and the angle that it makes it comes in kind of makes it knock it off. And there are other settings you can mess around here, such as bounce, which is how much bounciness it has as a material. So if we change this closer to 1, the higher it bounces, the more reactive it is. And then the lower it is, the less it reacts off of an object. So there you have it. That's the basics of the physics system. As you can see, there's a lot of different things you can do with this. You can create a lot of different systems using just physics objects. And physics does work on top of the ability to touch objects and to move them in code. So you can have physics and your interactions. The one thing you do need to concern yourself with is having physics objects kind of interact on top of each other. So if you put two physics objects in the same place through code, they will react unexpectedly. So make sure that when you first create your initial environment, when you first start your gravity, that everything is cleanly placed, so nothing is kind of overlapping. And if you have objects moving around through code, try to make sure that they don't try to force themselves on top of each other, because they will react violently. So there you have it, the basics of physics. In the next section we're going to cover serialization, which is saving things to the device.